It's just after 12 o'clock. My name is Benji Cohn. I'm hosting the Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series today with our fantastic guest, Nick Trauba he's the Assistant Wildlife Manager down in Lac La Parle. So we're going to talk a little bit about early goose season, all the good stuff we need to know, and how geese are faring in Minnesota. So welcome, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. I hope everybody can see the PowerPoint all right. Like Ben said, my name is Nick Trauba, and I am an Assistant Area Wildlife Manager at Lac La Parle WMA. Lac La Parle WMA is about 33,000 acres of public land. It's about 2.5 hours straight west of the Twin Cities. So if you were to take Highway 7 and head west, it'd bring you right to the wildlife area. A little bit about myself. I grew up literally on the WMA. My dad, Dave Trauba, was the area wildlife manager at Lac La Parle for about 25 years. So I grew up hunting and fishing my whole life around Lac La Parle. I started waterfall hunting when I was about 14 years old, and I guided waterfall hunts professionally for about 12 years now. So let's get into it. So how to hunt early season geese. So before we can talk about how to hunt early season geese, we need to know a little bit about goose ecology and management. So the illustration on the screen shows the 4 most common goose subspecies that are found in Minnesota. So as you can see, on the left there is Canada goose. And prior to 2004, there used to be 11 different subspecies of Canada goose. But in 2005, they split the species into 2 different species. So you have Canada goose there pictured on the left with the 3 subspecies that are common in Minnesota, the giant, interior, and lesser. And then on the right is the new species that they consider cackling goose, and the Richardson's goose is the one on the right. And the giant Canada goose is this goose subspecies that we hunt during the early season in Minnesota. So this illustration shows just kind of the differences in size between the giant Canada goose on the upper left, or upper right, excuse me, and the interior subspecies of Canada goose on the bottom left. Body size, pretty similar, a little bit bigger, much larger wingspan, longer neck. The bill has a slight taper in it compared to the interior. But in all honesty, it's very hard to tell the difference between a giant Canada goose and an interior Canada goose in flight. And some interesting facts about giant Canada geese. The current estimate for the population is around 4 million birds in North America, but the population hasn't always been that way. By the early 20th century, giant Canada geese had been extirpated throughout most of their range as a result of unregulated hunting, egg collecting, and habitat destruction. And in fact, the subspecies was thought to be extinct for nearly 3 decades, until Harold Hansen of the Illinois Natural History Survey discovered a small remnant population near Rochester, Minnesota in 1962. And due to many successful reintroduction programs, the giant Canada goose population is now widespread and locally abundant. And the 2022 population estimate for giant Canada geese in Minnesota is 115,000, which is 4% above the 2019 estimate, but 20% below the 10-year average. So now we can kind of get into the where, what, when, and how. So some season details. The season is open statewide September 3rd through the 18th, so just a little over 10 days away. It's a 5-bird limit for Canada white-fronted and brant geese combined, and a 20-bird limit of snow blue snow, and Ross geese. Shooting hours are a half hour before sunrise to sunset. Hunting over water is legal statewide. Places you can hunt are public lands and waters such as WMAs, walk-in areas, and waterfall production areas, and private lands with permission. And the bulk of the early goose hunting will take place on private lands. So what to bring on the hunt? So required licenses, you'll need a small game license, a state waterfall stamp, a federal duck stamp, a special goose permit, and a special goose permit is the license that's specific to the early goose season in Minnesota, and HIP certification. And what HIP stands for is the Harvest Information Program. It's an annual program in which hunters provide information that helps biologists manage North America's migratory game bird populations. And what it is, when you go to buy a small game license at any licensed dealer, the license agent will ask you a series of questions, and those questions, how you answer them, are then used to make management decisions for migratory game birds. So some of the common questions are, did you hunt ducks last year? Yes or no. And then usually it's, how many did you harvest? 0 to 1, 1 to 2, more than 10, that type of deal. Second thing you'll need is a shotgun for shooting, preferably a 12 gauge, but a 20 gauge is acceptable if you use the correct shot size and shot placement and know your distances. Shells that contain non-toxic pellets rather than lead. Some common shot sizes that Canada goose hunters use are number 1, number 2, double B, and triple B. Decoys to lure geese within range. A goose call to attract birds to your spread. A blind if applicable. And then camouflage clothing. And kind of a general rule of thumb is you want to try to blend into your surroundings as best as you can so you don't look like a dark spot or a light spot from above. And then last but not least, don't forget bug spray. So the big question, how to be successful. The 3 most important tips to success. Number 1, scouting. And if you can remember only one slide from today's presentation, this is the one to remember. Scouting often begins early in the summer, and you want to get familiar with the area that you plan to hunt come fall time. And on the next couple of slides, we'll look at different ways to increase your efficiency while scouting. Number 2 is scouting. I think you guys can probably all tell a theme here, but you must find birds and pattern birds. If you are in an area with no birds or don't know the daily patterns and habits of the birds in the area, it will limit the success you will have with your time in the field. And then number 3, you can't forget to scout. It never hurts to have a backup plan if your first plan doesn't work out. Early season geese are notorious for switching patterns right before the season opens. And I think the saying goes, failing to plan is planning to fail. And it definitely rings true in the goose field. So scouting, so things to bring with while scouting. Probably the most important nowadays is a cell phone. A cell phone is very useful. There's many apps like Onyx Maps and HuntStand that show aerial photos with different layers that you can access. Some of the layers that are most common for goose hunters are the public lands layer and then the private landowner parcel data. You can also use your cell phone to access aerial photos such as Google or Apple Maps. Minnesota DNR Rec Compass is another great tool that you can use on your cell phone that'll show all the different public land layers in Minnesota and also shows real-time aerial photos. And then different county GIS systems. Many county websites have links to landowner parcel data on them. Number 2, be a plat book. So if you're old school, you can still use a plat book to get landowner information. Every county in Minnesota has, plat books available every year. You can find them at most banks, courthouses, post office, that sort of thing. Third thing I would bring with would be a phone book. Many of the newer plat books have a section in the front with the landowner name and phone number in them, but not every plat book in every county has that. So it's just another good tool to have with you while you're out scouting. A notepad, take notes on different fields you see. If you get a cell phone number from a neighbor, it's just another handy thing to have in your vehicle while you're out looking for birds. And then a state atlas, it never fails, especially if you're in some other states where cell service isn't the greatest. It doesn't hurt to have, a state atlas so you can navigate your way about the state. And then probably most important, don't forget the snacks. So what to look for while scouting? You got to think like a goose. So the one thing that all geese are looking for during the early season is food. And some of the most common types of food that attract early season geese are small grains such as spring wheat, oats, barley. Some other types of food that are starting to come out would be corn silage and sweet corn, and then alfalfa and hay. Second thing that geese are looking for are water. So areas such as cattle ponds and dugouts, food-rich wetlands, and then wet spots and egg fields, which at least in far western Minnesota, we are not going to have very many wet spots and egg fields unless we get a bunch of precipitation. And then unique or unusual areas, and these are the ones that are often overlooked by hunters, but gravel pits, golf courses, wastewater treatment ponds, and power plants. So asking permission. So once you find a place with geese using the area, you have to get permission if it's private land. If the area you found with geese using it was public land, then you can obviously skip this step. But so my first tip is to ask in advance of the season. You don't want to be going to the door at 9 o'clock at night the day before the season opens in hope to get a yes. Um, you know, in my practice, you want to go, a couple weeks before the season opens. Start finding those areas that you think might have birds using them, and when they first start going to some different fields, get as many landowners lined out as you can, so that when you're a week before the season opens, you can start asking permission. Make a good first impression. So what that means, don't show up with dirty work clothes, or if the season's already open, don't show up after a hunt with bloody hands and bloody clothes. Often asking permission, I think of it as kind of a job interview, and you want to make the best impression you can. Be polite and respectable, kind of goes without saying, but and then get details on where, when, and how. So when I do get permission from a landowner to hunt their property, I want to make sure that we're both on the same page. So some of the questions that I'll often ask are, is the permission for one day? Is it for the season? Are there any places on their property that they don't want me to hunt? Are there any times of like the week that they don't want me to hunt? And then are there any like special circumstances, like if it's a cattle pasture that you're hunting, are there fences that they want, left open or closed? And then any special places that they want me to park are typically the things I want to ask them to make sure that we're both on the same page. And then I often like to give back, and that can be just a simple thank you at the end of the season, a Christmas card, a gift certificate to a local restaurant. But probably one of my favorite things to do is to make a bunch of venison and goose jerky and package it up real nice and give it to them at the end of the season. They really seem to appreciate that. And then some things not to do, you know, leave big ruts in their fields. And then just always remember just to pick up all your trash, make sure all the shell casings are picked up, and just leave the property better than you found it. So once permission is secured, some things to consider. The type of hide and where you are going to hide. So in this picture, you know, it's a spring wheat field. The stubble's pretty long. So hiding in the middle of the field is probably doable. But if the situation was a silage field where the field is harvested clean, hiding out in the middle of the field probably isn't the best way to go. So you want to look at alternative spots to hide. So it might be a fence line, it might be standing corn adjacent to the cut silage. But those are the things that you need to consider. And second to scouting, your hide and how well you're hidden is probably the second most important part to success in goose hunting. Second thing I like to consider is how long it will take to set up. Many variables play into that. You know, how many people are in your party, how many decoys you plan to set up. If you're brushing in blinds, you know, how long will that take? Kind of a general rule of thumb, I like to be, you know, in the field about an hour before shooting time starts. That way, I have plenty of time to set decoys, plenty of time to brush in my blinds, and then, you know, any mishaps that happen, you have time to plan for them. Third thing I like to consider is weather and wind direction. You know, is it going to be sunny? Are there going to be rain, fog? And then the wind direction. I like to set my, you know, an ideal situation would be you have the wind at your back and the sun at your back. But those two things don't often line up together. Fourth thing I like to consider are where the geese are coming from. And then your surroundings. Are there any houses on the edge of the property, cattle in the area, just anything, you know, it could be a road, power lines, tree lines. I just want to get a sense of my surroundings. So different types of hides. The first type is just natural. So that could be, you know, in this picture here, just standing in or sitting in standing corn or a fence line. It could be hiding in cattails along a marsh. Second option would be a layout blind. This is a good option if you have no cover on the edge of the field, but the cover in the field is conducive to hiding your blind. On a layout blind, there are stubble straps, which in this picture is kind of hard to see, but just making sure as many of those straps have natural vegetation on them, it just goes a long way to concealing your layout blind. Another option is an A-frame blind. They're typically meant for field edges, along standing corn, along fence lines, somewhere where the profile of the blind doesn't stand out. In this picture, the example, you know, it's not grassed in yet, so you can kind of see on this picture better the stubble straps on the blind. So before the season starts, I would go around and get vegetation to match the area I plan to hunt and have that all camoed up. So the day of the hunt, you're not scrambling to get that done. And then a pit blind. Pit blinds are for more long-term areas that you plan to hunt. It's going to take a lot of coordination with the landowner. But what it is, it's just an underground pit that you dig, usually with an excavator, and then you cover the top with natural vegetation, so you're actually below ground. It can be a very, very effective option, but very time consuming and very costly. So decoys, probably the most popular but most expensive option for goose hunting are full body decoys. They are the most realistic, but things to consider is the space they take up. So you're going to need either a large pickup or an enclosed trailer to haul them to and from the field. Second option, still very realistic. Don't take up quite as much room as a full body decoy does. But for the price, they are still rather expensive. Silhouette decoys, they were very popular back in the 1980s, 1990s, and then kind of lost popularity when full body decoys came on the market. But newer silhouettes are very popular nowadays with hunters. As you can see in the picture, very realistic. They have flocked heads, so they don't shine in the sun. They are rather inexpensive, and you can pack a lot of decoys in a pretty small space. So I definitely I do like to use silhouettes while goose hunting now. Another type of decoy is a floater. Obviously used on the water applications. Not the easiest to pack in if you're walking a long distance, but as this picture shows, very realistic, flocked heads. They don't shine in the sun. Just an effective decoy if you're hunting over water. Another option is a silhouette sock. It's kind of a pair between a silhouette and a full body, so you get very easily packable in, less expensive than a full body, but they look good when they're out in the field. And then another type is a flag. Flags are used to kind of gain attention of geese from a long distance, but can also be used when finishing birds in close. Just lifting the flag up a little bit, draws their attention back to where you want them to land. So decoy setup and tips. Generally during the early season, I use the approach that less is more. And what that means is I want to match what I put in the field to what I saw during, when I was out scouting. So if I'm scouting a field and there's only 40 birds in the field, I don't want to put 10 dozen decoys in the field just because they're going to know something's up. So I like to use, less is more. So you might only put out, 24 decoys in that type of situation. And then mirror what the birds were doing. So if all the birds you are scouting on the field are, in one particular spot, that's kind of where I like to set up my decoys. Early season geese tend to come into the field in family groups. They're still very family orientated. So that's kind of how I mimic my decoy spread. So that picture in the top right, you can kind of see my layout blind is in the middle there. And then I have just family groups of, 6 to 8 decoys kind of arranged all the way around the blind. And then kind of same with the bottom right, very few decoys in this spread. Spread out family groups, plenty of spots for them to land, which kind of leads me into my next section. Leave larger open spaces. During the early season, food is plentiful, so geese aren't very fond of just packing in one spot. They like to spread out when they're in the field. So I mimic my decoy setups to match what I'm seeing out in the field. And then some other decoy setups and tips. I like to not have my furthest decoy be more than 40 yards from my blind. Early season geese are notorious for landing short. And what I mean is they'll look like they're coming in at you perfectly, but then land, 100 yards from the blind. So the closer you keep the decoys to where you're hiding, it just increases the chances that they're going to finish within shooting range. And then also, I never like to be hiding in my decoys if I can. I like to, have a little bit of space between my blind and the nearest decoy, just so the birds aren't focused on where I'm hiding, they're focused on the decoys. And then don't be afraid to change. If that first flock of the morning, doesn't commit or lands short, often, you just want to sit tight and wait for the next flock to come in and hope they do it right. But often, changing the decoys, either pulling some in or moving some further away, is often your best chance of success. Goose calling tips, again, less is more. Kind of same thing as decoys. I like to, watch the geese come into the field when I'm scouting and listen. And, if they're not making much noise when they're coming into the field, I will do the same thing when I'm out hunting. I'll call very, very little, if possible. The only thing would be is if you're hunting the X versus the traffic spot. So all that is referring to is, the X is the field that have the birds in it, and a traffic spot is you're hoping to pull geese off that field that they're going into a field that you have permission for. So if you can't get permission for the field that the birds want to be in, but you can get permission for a field that's maybe on that same flight path, but not exactly where the birds want to be, then I would probably call more aggressively, louder. You want to be more excited just to draw their attention to you instead of that other field. And then don't show all your cards. And all that means is often you're going to be hunting that same group of birds, multiple times throughout the season. So those first couple of hunts, you don't want to be showing them all the different, range of your goose call. So keep it simple. And then as the season progresses, when the birds start to get a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser, then you can kind of up the different calling routines you do to them and hope that increases your chance of success. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Find my unmute button there. Thanks, Nick. That's a lot of awesome information there. We'll see if anybody pops in with some questions. I did have one question. I was looking at the new, we just got those out, the Waterfall Regulations that just came out not too long ago. We do have those available in the 5 languages, Spanish, Karen, Somali, and English, and Hmong, I believe. So if anybody needs those, you can reach out to us or reach out to your local DNR office and we can get that to them too. But I was going through there and I had a question. I know we did a beginning to waterfall hunt talk here last fall, I believe it was, and you can find that in our recorded webinars. But the shooting hours for the early teal season it starts at sunrise, I believe. And how does that overlaps with the early goose season? So is that first week of early goose season a sunrise shooting limit also, or?
No, if you're hunting early season geese, it would still be a half hour before. I think if you were, let's say hunting a slough or a wetland and you're trying to target both early season geese and teal, you could harvest geese before a half hour before sunrise, and then once sunrise comes, then you could start harvesting teal. But you couldn't harvest teal before half hour before sunrise.
Okay, great. Chris asked in the chat, and again, I'm going to remind everybody if you can ask him in the Q&A, it helps us out a little bit. Chris asked, what duration do you stay on the hunt? Do you stay out there all morning or all day, or how long are you typically out in the field?
I like to give it till at least 10:30. Often those first birds that come into the field are going to be pretty close to that sunrise time, so half hour to 45 minutes after sunrise. But then what's going to happen is you're going to hopefully shoot into those flocks, and they're going to go out and then hopefully, group back up somewhere, and then they're probably going to try to come back at some point. And then same kind of deal, if you're in an area with lots of different places for people to hunt, other hunters are going to be bumping around birds. So I've always, seen kind of an uptick in geese flying around that 9 to 9:30. So I always like to stay out till about 10:30. Just depends on the day.
Great. Tim says, thanks for the great information. He's looking forward to hunting this season. So Mark had a question in the Q&A there. Thanks, Mark. Said he doesn't have a whole lot of time to scout. Said, what do you look for in a dependable water spot you can go back to year after year? I realize it's not an ideal situation for fast action, but he's happy to get a goose or two a day.
Sure. Yeah, no, that is a great question. So things that I would look for in a spot like that would be, you want something that's not right on the beaten path, something that's off the beaten path, something that's not going to get a lot of pressure, from scouters, something where that geese are going to feel comfortable using, throughout the season. Areas that I would look for would be, areas with lots of cattle operations, lots of small dugout ponds, lots of pasture area. So places like that would be, a place that I'd first look. And then smaller wetlands off of larger lakes can often be pretty good too.
Great. Steve had another question, and you covered it a little bit about setting decoys up in some family groups. He said, what about on hunting on a larger lake or larger pond? Would your decoy setup be in a particular letter shape or kind of scattered into family groups similar to what you're talking about in a field? So
Yeah, so I guess the letter shape that probably most people are familiar with is like the U and J. They're pretty common in duck and goose hunting. If I was hunting a larger lake, I would still probably have my decoys arranged in family groups, but can kind of loosely follow, that U or J shape. If you're hunting the edge of a larger lake, have a few of those family groups kind of on the edge of the water, walking up on the land, and then probably depending on the wind direction, one of my, the tail of the J kind of extending out into the water a little bit. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. You can stop your PowerPoint if you want, and then we can see who we're talking to a little bit better. I know from duck hunting, there's always, we should try a V or try a J, and
yeah,
just curious if that's kind of the same for geese or not. But
yeah, as far as decoys going, I didn't really touch on it in my presentation, but you don't have to have a lot of decoys to have success. During the early season, I've had tons of good hunts just carrying in 6 full body decoys into a small field. So you don't. The misconception is that you need a trailer full of full bodies, and that's just not the case.
Yeah, we'll save that for the guys who are getting paid to guide you out there. They have the big trailer full
Right.
stuff,
Yeah.
So location, I like your scouting plan, scouting, and what was it? If you fail to plan, you plan for failure, and
Yeah.
that's probably a good option. So
yeah, I don't know how many times I've thought I had just a slam dunk spot for opener, and then that Friday before you're out scouting, hoping just to sit there and watch all the birds pile into the field, and none of them show up, and you're just like, where did they go? So that's why having those backup spots and plan B and C options already kind of planned out can really make for a more successful opener.
Sounds like every turkey season for me, Tom.
Right. Yeah.
Todd had a great question. He said he joined a little bit late, but he was wondering if there's any significant advantage over using a 12 gauge over a 20 gauge, or if you're using heavy number 2s, and the same for the 3.5 over 2 3/4 or 3-inch shells. So if you want to touch on that, or Craig Kiger's on here too, or shooting sports expert, he might have some opinions on that too. So
yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily a specific advantage of using a 12 gauge over a 20 gauge. I guess my advice would be to use what's most comfortable for you and what you shoot best. So if you like shooting a 20 gauge and you're comfortable with the 20 gauge and you've patterned that that gun, that's the gun that I would use. As far as shot sizes, I am I'm the person that uses a number 2 for everything, just because that way I don't have to worry about what's in my my blind bag. So I can use it for duck hunting, goose hunting. But as far as shot sizes go, I think a lot of the newer ammunition now, they all pattern fairly well, and they all have plenty of knockdown power to put down a goose humanely.
Great, and that's one of the things I think the early goose season really provides. That, from my limited experience in goose hunting, going out with some friends years ago, was you don't really need to go out and buy a new shotgun. You can use what you have. You don't need a whole ton of decoys. You can use a couple. If you all ever brings 2 or 3, you're good to go. There's not a whole ton of special equipment that you need to do this. And so
Right.
it makes it kind of a nice little way to get into it. And it's usually fairly warm. So
Right.
you're not going to sit out there like the first day of deer camp and freeze.
Mhm.
So Steve had another good question. I just saw these things at Game Fair. We were there last week, and the butt decoys that dive down, they shoot a little water out the back. And
Mm-hmm.
Steve was wondering, what's your opinion on using Goosebutts in your floating decoy set? He said he tends to see birds flare a lot with those.
Yeah, I guess in my personal experience, I haven't used one of those yet. I think they probably have their place where they're more effective. But if you're personally seeing them, flare birds in your experience, I would go with your experience, and if they're flaring birds, I'd maybe kind of experiment with different placements. Maybe putting it further out so the birds aren't focusing on that right away. Might draw them in close enough, and then that catches their attention and maybe makes it look more realistic. But yeah, if you notice something and you think that's flaring birds, I would probably remove it from my spread.
It could, I suppose, depend on where exactly you're hunting and what the birds are seeing in other places too, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the wetlands that I hunt aren't super, food rich. So they're not typically out there, feeding. They're using those sites more as loafing and resting areas. So you kind of have to match your decoy spread to what you're seeing.
Right. I'm checking in the chat here to see if we have any other questions coming up. Well, Todd had a follow up here.
Sure.
I have an old 1951 Ithaca 3712 gauge. Beyond being careful with its bismuth shot in place of lead, is there anything else I should be concerned, as long as I've had it checked out by a gunsmith? So that might
That might
be a great question too.
yeah, that'd be not a question for me.
So I always consider checking stuff out with a gunsmith, because I'm not a gun expert by any means. So there's Greg Geiger turned his camera on. He's our shooting sport expert. So do you want to give an opinion on that one, Craig? Or
Did you say what the choke was in it?
he did not. If you want to type that in there, Todd.
Even if it's a full choke model, that bismuth load is designed for older shotguns without choke tubes, and they will conform. They're softer than steel. That's the main issue, is getting those BBs to slide through that tight constriction. And bismuth should work fine in your gun, but have a check by a gunsmith. Just verify that you're good to go, and take it out and hunt with it. That's what it was made for. So
Yeah. Ted wrote back and said the gunsmith told me he opened it up a bit. So
that'll help the BB slide through a little easier. It's going to cut down on your
There you
range just a little bit, but it should work.
just get out there and do a little patterning and test shooting with that, and see how it does. So, and I think that's the last question I saw. Nick, great job. A lot of great information on there. I'm kind of looking forward to trying to get out a little bit this year. I haven't hunted geese for a long time, and I inherited a few goose decoys here just a year ago. So late last fall. So might have to get out and give it a shot. And this is one of those things I can do without a water dog. I don't have any dogs anymore, so kind of looking forward to that. So thank you so much. Any last comments or before you take off? Or?
The only thing I would add is on my last slide I had my contact information. So if anybody watching this wants to talk to me directly after the show, you have my phone number on there. I'd be more than happy to talk waterfowl hunting. So if you have any questions, just reach out.
And Lac La Parle's just it's just straight out Highway 7 there, west of the cities, out to Montevideo area, right? Just
Yep,
north of
correct. Yeah, about 2.5 hours straight west of the city, so not too far.
It's a pretty drive, and one of those things to get out there scouting. We got about 10 days before the season opens up. I was out the other day, and the puffballs are getting big, and the chicken in the woods are getting big, and it's a good way to just get out and be in the woods a little bit, scout the fields, and talk to some landowners, and see if you can find a spot. So
yeah, morning dove season starts on next Thursday, so that kind of kicks off our season here at Lac La Parle.
So come next week, we're not going to be able to talk to you much. You're going to be busy out there, huh?
I'll be busy. Yeah, it's I would say the opening day of dove season is probably now one of our busiest days on the wildlife unit.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yep.
That's good news. People are getting out there. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, next week, Craig Kiger and James Burnham are going to be talking about
ammunition,
ammunition.
Yep.
There's a couple of gentlemen from Federal Ammunition, so that should be an interesting talk. If you're and Todd, if you want to tune in and ask them about some of the older guns and some of the new ammunition, that'd be a good time to do that too. So.
Yep.
And then we do have our full schedule, just got announced today. We just put that live on the website this morning. So mndnr.gov, search for outdoor skills, and you will come to our webpage, and we got a whole list of programs through the end of November that you can register for. Registration's free. We just answer a couple questions, and we'll provide you with the link, and we're good to go. So any last parting words, Craig?
Just remember that we've got our Learn to Deer Hunt classes coming up.
Yes.
You can find that on the DNR website under Learn to Deer Hunt. And if you're new to deer hunting, we'd love to take you out and teach you what we need or what we know about it and what you need to know. So check us out on that too.
It's a great opportunity for adults that are looking for a little more information on getting out and learning to deer hunt. So we're getting back in person. I'm kind of excited to join you guys out there and do some of that. So I think with that, we're going to stop the recording, and hopefully we'll see everybody next week. Have a good weekend. Get out to the state fair and enjoy the sun. It's getting lively out here. The corn dog stand right by the DNR booth is just opening up. I'm hoping they're cooking some corn dogs because I'm getting hungry. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you next week.